Thank you very much for coming today out of your busy schedules. I would like to serve as moderator for today from the Renewable Energy Institute. My name is Hirose. It is a pleasure to see you all. In starting the symposium from the Renewable Energy Institute, Mr. Teruyuki Ono, Executive Director and Secretary General, will make an opening remark. Thank you very much for coming today to the International Symposium Offshore Wind, how to realize high integration of variable renewable energy on the grid. This symposium is jointly hosted by the Renewable Energy Institute and the Royal Danish Embassy. Denmark, as of last year, used natural energy, including wind power, for approximately 70% of their domestic power generation and is thus one of the world's top countries in terms of natural energy. Denmark, like Japan, is a country with scarce resources with no domestic fossil fuels. During the oil crisis in the 1970s, the Danish economy, just like Japan, also suffered from economic damage. The difference between the two countries is the measure taken afterwards, where Japan promoted the development of nuclear power and coal-fired power plants as alternatives to oil, whereas Denmark focused on the development of biomass and wind power, thus pioneering in the development of pure domestic energy. And I may be digressing somewhat from the main topic, but people of my age, when you were elementary school students, must have seen in our Japanese textbooks the story entitled The Greatest Heritage to the Future, the Story of Denmark, written by Kanzo Uchimura, a philosopher during the Meiji period, almost 150 years ago. According to this story, in the late 19th century, Denmark lost in the war with Germany and Austria and had to give up two of their most fertile states. In dire poverty, the Danish people planted trees in the wilderness, developed stock farming as its national industry, and revived into a rich country again. Hit by the oil crisis in the 1970s, Denmark started to develop their natural resources, including wind power, and now Denmark is a very competitive country again, and there is a lot we in Japan can learn from this new story of Denmark. Japan is still depending a lot on fossil fuel and wind power and solar energy. We have not been able to introduce them in mass scale. So in the symposium today, we will focus on we would like to learn a lot from Denmark, which is much more advanced than us. In the symposium today, we will focus on offshore wind power, which is showing particularly significant growth among renewable energy. We would like to study about the offshore wind power trends throughout the world. And I hope this symposium will serve as an opportunity to further invigorate the efforts of Japanese companies, central and local governments to expand the use of natural energy. It's a great pleasure to see so many of you in the audience today. Thank you very much.
I would like to now ask His Excellency Ambassador Freddie Svaini, the Danish ambassador to Japan, to give opening remarks.
Konnichiwa. Minasama, I am the Danish ambassador Makano Taishides, and I'm extremely pleased and honored to be with you today. Denmark is setting an example, and I hope when you're leaving this symposium today that you will remember not only what I said, but also what the other co-hosts were saying. Of course, the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs is very, very keen to promote the green agenda abroad. But today, it's the embassy co-hosting with the Renewable Energy Institute of Japan. And I hope that you will listen very, very carefully. I'm also pleased that we have three frontrunners in the green transformation of Denmark present here today. We have Peter Jørgensen from Energy Net, the smart, resilient grid that will secure that you can really do the green transformation. We also have the MHI Vestas, Yamada-san and his colleagues. They did what was needed to bring Japanese industry into the renewable business. So MHI Vestas really the front mover when it comes to the offshore wind. And then, of course, we also have the former Dong or Ørsted, who is one of the world leading companies in securing the green transformation. And when they started out, they were black like many other industries, but then they decided to change their direction. If you don't change your direction, you are ending up where you're supposed to end. But they decided to change the direction. So today they are the front movers. They are the front in moving the green, sustainable energy everywhere in the world. And they're also present here in Japan. Denmark, the Danish government, as it was said by Ono Sensei, Denmark was and is a small country. We lost, in fact, as it was said, 1/3 of our territory. We fought too many wars, and then suddenly we were quite small, and we had to develop our own strategy to survive. In 1864, we lost the biggest battle ever, and we had to hand over to our friends, the Germans, a huge part of our territory. In fact, that led visionary politicians to go to Japan. So this was 1864, and in 1867, we signed the Treaty of Friendship, Shipping, Navigation, and Commerce with Japan. So we were country number 11. So we lost, but we gained, and we got the friendship of you, the Japanese, and that's why we are here today. The Danish government said, okay, let's transform. What we have lost to the outside, we have to gain from the inside. And as it also was said, energy-wise, we had nothing. But we had the old Fuchsers, the wind turbines, and suddenly very entrepreneurial people decided to develop this kind of old technology into a cutting-edge technology to reduce our dependence on fossil fuel. And today, I think Denmark is really the front leader. Last year, I think 43% of all electricity consumed, not produced, but consumed, came from wind. And you might, oh, good to see you, Tajima-san. You might claim that Denmark is a special place, but we are not that special. If you divide Japan into Denmarks, you will have 7 Denmarks. So you can do exactly what Denmark did. You just have to repeat it 7 times. It's not so difficult. And we decided really that we had to reduce our dependence on fossil fuel. One word which also will resonate with you, the Japanese, is security. And one security, it's about how an independent country can survive and stay tuned in a global world. You need 5 S's. I will only concentrate on security, energy security. If Japan has to import 88% of your energy from outside, I will claim you're not that independent because you have to negotiate with a lot of partners. They can be friendly to you. They can also be hostile to you, but you never know. So you have to develop your own energy supply. And we think that Denmark, the offshore wind industry, is showing the way also for Japan. But offshore wind, and you have these fantastic they are no longer here, but at least there are a few ones here. The wind turbines. They are perhaps the best, most green solution to get a stable supply of wind. But they cannot stand alone, and if you put them into the sea, that's fantastic, and I hope to see many more offshore wind farms in Japan. I know you can do it if you want to. But you need to develop a resilient, solid, very robust grid. And in Denmark, it took, and Mr. Peter Jorgensen will explain to you in detail later how long it took. And it's not something that you do overnight. It will take a number of years. But the mental process is much more important. And to have these transmission system operators to understand that what kind of business they have to be involved in and how to secure that you change the whole setting and you create a competitive market for a number of businesses. That's the transformation. I believe you can do it, and I think you should do it. Not only because I'm a salesman of Danish energy solution, but also because I care about your country. I think your country needs to have a lesser dependence on fossil fuel. And you can play a very, very important role if you want to. I have been arguing, lobbying for a long time to secure that the Japanese government will adopt a new law that will create a better framework for the installation of offshore wind farms. And it seems that this law that will grant the operators 30 years of concession, that's in being, let's say, adopted at the upcoming extraordinary session. And I hope for Japan, I hope for you that you will adopt it. If that's going to happen, you will have a fantastic green future. This upcoming weekend, your Foreign Minister Conor is going to Denmark to participate in a very, very important summit meeting called P4G, Partnership for Global Green Growth and the SDGs. How we can turn the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, into a competitive edge. And we hope that the Japanese government will come up with very strong message when it comes to the green transformation, and that Japan will take the lead and will join the P4G kind of group and set out a new agenda. And Japan has a very, very, very important role to play. Next year, Japan will be hosting the G20 presidency, bringing in the 20 most important countries from all over the world to Japan. And I do hope that Japan will put herself into the driver's seat. You deserve it. You have the talent, you have the technologies, and you have the money. So it's only a mental process. And I hope that this symposium today will force you and change your kind of attitude, so you will move from the very black industries with black, dark solutions into a green, prosperous, very, very sustainable future. You can do it if you want to. I'm not here to preach. I'm here to tell you and inspire you. So I hope you will be inspired by this symposium and listen carefully to those who will know a lot about this stuff. Peter Jorgensen from EnergyNet, Matthias from Ørsted, and Yamada-san from MHI Vestas. They will guide you. They will become the stars of the day because they will tell you and show to you how you can do it if you want to. But it's a political process. So don't forget to talk to your politicians. I don't see that many politicians today, but perhaps they will listen carefully one way or another. Also have to promote a little bit. This is Think Denmark. It's about the offshore wind industry, and I hope you will look into it. I have 1 minute left, or he's very tough with me, but 1 minute just to tell you that in 2050, Denmark wants to become fossil fuel free. We can do it. We can do it, and we want to do it. In 2030, 55% of all energy consumed will come from renewables. So imagine if you split up Japan in 7 Denmarks, how far you can come when we come to 2030. So with these words, I wish you a happy green day, and may you be inspired. And when you are leaving, don't forget this one, because it's your ticket to growth and a sustainable future. Domo arigatou gozaimashita. Hai.
Thank you very much. At this moment, we would like to move on to the keynote speeches. First, on behalf of Ørsted, in charge of Asia Pacific, Mr. Matthias Bausenwein is asked to speak. Mr. Bausenwein, if you could please take the floor.
Thank you very much for having me here. My name is Matthias Bausenwein. I'm the General Manager for Ørsted in Asia Pacific. I think I've come to Japan to talk offshore wind for roughly 6 years, more than 6 years, traveling in very frequently. And I'm based in Taiwan now, chairing our efforts in Taiwan, where we develop 2.5 gigawatt of offshore wind to be built by 2025, starting construction already next year. I think I have very much believed in the potential for Japan. The Japan market will develop. I can see there's a lot of interest, and I hope it will develop very fast now. I give you an overview today about Ørsted, first of all. What company are we and how we have transitioned and what we are doing now. Then I will talk about how offshore wind could grow, the Asian markets, what are the success drivers, and how can we kickstart a market. Ørsted, if you look at it at a glance, we are a state-owned company, still 50.1% in the hands of the Kingdom of Denmark. We are very engaged in wind power. On the left side, you can see the box where we develop, construct, own wind farms. We have just recently also added a lot of onshore wind to the portfolio again. But we also do bioenergy and thermal power. We do energy storage and solar. And we do classic utility business, distributing, and also develop different kinds of customer solutions in some of the Northwestern European markets. We have 5,600 employees roundabout, and we are now stock listed at the Danish Stock Exchange. But we're not just a developer when it comes to developing big infrastructure, energy projects, offshore wind projects. We have an integrated end-to-end business model. We develop, we build, and we operate these wind farms. We also own them. So that means we develop one project after the other, but we also stay in there for the lifetime of offshore wind projects, which is 25, 30 years. That means when we come into a market, we always come with a long-term agenda, not thinking so much about divesting, but rather how to make this a long-term success, how to develop a sustainable market. And this is also the approach we have in Taiwan, or we have for Japan when we would come here. We want to see how this can become a very long-term success and offshore wind become a fundamental part of the energy mix in a country. We always try to find local partners. We have investors in our projects indeed. I gave you two Japanese names here at the top. In some of our UK projects, we have Marubeni, Sumitomo. But we also have partners on the utility side. We have partners from insurance company, life insurance, pension funds, and different other kinds of investors. Also the Lego Group. So it is very diversified, and more investors discover green energy as an interesting investment. They also transition from black to green and search for very attractive long-term investment. So we have a lot of experience in offshore wind. We have a proven track record with long-term partnerships, and we always are trusted partners and advisors to our key stakeholders and the governments. Our offshore wind footprint is now, of course, mainly in Europe. Europe is still the heart of offshore wind at this stage. That's where it has developed, where it has picked up, where it became big. But at the same time, it is now very much becoming global. We have a couple of years ago opened up our US presence, mainly at the East Coast, but growing fast all over the country. And we have 3 years ago decided to go into Asia. And as I said, while we always believe very much in the Japanese market, the first decision for Asia was to go into the Taiwanese market, where we were one of the first companies to engage and have basically played a crucial role there in kickstarting the market. The first wind farm has been built by Ørsted, or in those days under still a different name, but in 1991. We have now more than 25 years of track record in the offshore wind power sectors, 24 offshore wind farms in operation and 4 under construction, with 2,300 people dedicated to offshore wind only. And that sums up to 5.1 gigawatt constructed now and more than 1,200 turbines under operation. I think it is of high interest for you how we have developed as a company from a, it has been mentioned, from a rather black company, as Freddie said, into a green company. And there was many influencing factors. Of course, 2 key factors were that we had a bold management who took some key decisions, and we also had a government who pushed us. But it was also a situation where many things came together, where we in 2006 formed a company out of different smaller companies in Denmark, which then formed Dong Energy. And at the same time, in the early 2000s, we had our legacy business being very much under pressure, eroding conventional power, midstream gas business. And we had a very diversified portfolio where we had onshore wind, offshore wind, hydro, conventional waste, virtual power plants, distribution, gas, LNG, oil and gas. It was just very diversified, and we had to take major steps to bring this on track. And one of the key decisions was to divest some of the non-core assets and at the same time invest significantly into offshore wind, which has in those days was like around about 81 billion DKK, and today we have a pipeline of 8.8 gigawatt by 2022. We also farmed down some of the onshore wind farms. We took a very ambitious journey to reduce the cost of electricity by around about 50%. We converted 5 out of 7 heat and power plants to biomass, sustainable biomass. We had some gas contracts we had to renegotiate. In general, a strategic shift in retail business from just commodity sales to more integrated green energy solutions, and some other financial topics. But the most important thing, we also divested oil and gas, and we then changed the name. That was natural because Dong Energy was Danish oil and natural gas. And then we have changed to Ørsted, which is a famous Danish scientist, which gave us the name. And at the same time, it reflects our vision of becoming a very green company and contributing to a world which entirely runs on green energy. I skip that, but if I give you a summary of what we have gone through over the last 10 years only, we have halved our CO2 emissions. In operating profit, we have become way more profitable. So green growth can also be profitable, and that's also how it should be. It is an attractive business. We have transformed our business in terms of capital employed from, you could see here, 60% conventional power and 16% renewables and other things, to now 83% in renewable energy, and of course the size of offshore wind playing an important role there. And we also have become a very international company. In 2006, most of our business was very much Northwestern Europe, Scandinavia, or actually Denmark. And we are now looking at a situation where we have 5 times more international business and are all over the world. Also a very exciting journey for us as a company, which comes with a lot of challenges. But we also think we are obliged as the market leader in offshore wind to bring offshore wind to countries who are interested in implementing it. I skip that, but this kind of travel and journey has made us the greenest company in Europe If you just look at the relative share, fair to say that Iberdrola and Enel are bigger now, but if you look at the share of what is green, then Ørsted is number one. And we will continue this journey, and we will be at 95% of complete green activities by 2023. If I look a bit at the global development of the markets, offshore wind is becoming truly global. We have now a situation where we're around about 13, 14 gigawatt of offshore wind installed in the world. But we see that by 2020 we'll already have over 30. It will go extremely fast. 2025 we expect 77, and then around about 130 gigawatt of offshore wind by 2030. Large part of that, and that is the green one, is driven by Asia. And we also believe that the key market growth for offshore wind will come from Asia from 2025 on latest. Fair to say, there is, and if you look to the right picture, a part of that is, of course, China. And China plays a big role in their growth. But we have a very conservative guess, and also Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg figures, but it's not so far from our guess. On Japan, very small at the moment. But I think we can very much change this outlook very quickly by taking also some bold decisions on the business side, but also on the government side, because you could say that the bases are loaded for offshore wind in Taiwan. There's a lot in Japan. There's a lot of interest, and the framework is about to be settled, but it needs to happen now. And as I said, with all due respect to the timelines in Japan, it takes time. But I think there's a very good chance to establish a fruitful market growth now up to 2030, which is not this small gray bar you can see here, but rather 7, 8, 9 gigawatt of offshore wind by 2030, which I think is very reasonable. For bottom-fixed offshore wind, by the way, not the floating, I would see that on top as a new technology. What we need for that is to bring the cost down. I think that established the success story for offshore wind in Europe. We have brought the cost down significantly. And that is only possible through volume. So again, if I say we want 7, 8 gigawatt of offshore wind in Japan by 2030, that is also the key enabler to bring the cost down. So we need a certain volume in order to enable scale, in order to enable competition among the supply chain, in order to take all the drivers into account, which brought the cost down in Europe. And together with some innovative concepts, I just show you here how the turbines are growing, how the foundation concepts are changing, how we industrialize. So we standardize processes and we standardize procurement. And then digitalization playing a big role. So all the data we have collected in Europe and the data we have also now, for example, in other Asian markets, that plays a crucial role to bring the cost down. But it is possible also in Asia. What we have seen in Europe is a very strong decrease from here to, comparing 2012 with 2017. We have brought down the cost to a level where we now say if we include the grid scope, so bring the cables onshore and the onshore substation, then we are at around about a levelized cost of electricity of 65 euros, which is strong and more and high and better than we would have expected. We were thinking about in 2012, we predicted a LCOE of like 100 euros per megawatt hour as one of the ambitious targets, and now we're at 65. And that is a big success, and you can see how that puts us in comparison to other sources. And, we are very close to high wind onshore. We're already better than low wind onshore, so but there is some good onshore sites where we probably have a bit of the difficulty to get that close yet. But we're already better than solar. We are better than all the conventional, if you take the LCOE view, which is the way you should do it. And what we need in order to achieve these long-term cost reductions is stable framework, stable remuneration. I just give you a quick German example here. We have had around about 7 gigawatt of build-out. It only stops in 2019. That means 10 years of feed-in tariff to allow for these cost reductions. This is not what we need in Japan or what we need in Asia. We can be faster because we have a lot of lessons learned, but we need some feed-in tariff, some stable framework, and then we can move to a more competitive environment very quickly, and that means then a tremendous cost reduction over time. I try to sketch a picture. If you look at the LCOE in Europe, the cost in Europe, then we're probably not there in Asia. Everybody will admit that. We think we are higher and way higher, and we can see that in Taiwan, and I think in Japan it's even more. But we also see that we need to develop a bit of a regional and stronger supply chain here, adapt technology to local conditions, and get the workflow force and the talent in place. And then together with a certain volume and scale, we have no doubt that the cost reduction path will be equally successful and visible in Japan or in wider Asia. But we need a clear and stable regulatory framework. So this is really at the political side, provide a framework which allows us to take high and large infrastructure investment, which is, just to give you an idea here, an offshore wind project that's very often 6, 7, up to 10 years of development. This is still average values from Europe. It can be faster, but not necessarily. If you, look, for example, look at the EIA process in Japan, you know that it's probably a fair guess to say a development of a project takes 6, 7 years. Then you have 1 to 2 years to build it, grid connection playing a role there, and then 20 years of operating or more. That means we need to have a foreseeable and clear and stable framework. And in Japan, we're not there yet. We're waiting for the law, but we're also waiting for a lot of sub-regulation. And I think that can be solved rather quickly, but it is something which is very much needed in order to kickstart the market. In Taiwan, it was not the subsidy, the high feed-in tariff or the attractive feed-in tariff, like many people say. It was a stable framework and a clear process on who approves what and how the shipping lanes look like and which ministry is in charge and a few other things which enabled investment decisions. Together with a clear revenue path and a feed-in tariff, but stability is the most important factor and a clear outlook. So what I said, key success for offshore wind, regulation, long-term stable framework, transparency, safety, or at least applying a certain amount of standards, quality, safety, in order to make these projects successful. Trust among all players, strong track records, world-class capabilities to be used, knowledge exchange between experienced players maybe from foreign countries and Japanese players who know the Japanese market very well. Commitment from all sides, government, but also suppliers need to take investment decisions into factories, into becoming local, foreign suppliers to invest here. Benefits, the local society needs to give permits. We have a lot of things which need to come together. Everybody needs to commit early and have a long-term vision. Lastly, to give you an indication, I mentioned Taiwan a couple of times. What made Taiwan successful is we had there a zonal application program. That was the game changer, which led to 11 gigawatt now under development, which is a healthy mix, I would say, between local and foreign developers. You can see on the left side here the different sites. Potentially it was 15 gigawatt, but then some vessel corridors and so came in. So it was then more or less 24 sites left. Where you can see here many different developers from different countries trying to develop these sites. And Ørsted as you can see on the right side, has engaged in two ways. We have engaged in a demonstration project together with a local developer and together with Macquarie as a financial investor mainly to make the first demonstration project happen in Taiwan. 2 turbines are spinning and another 20 turbines will be built in 2019, so that's still before 2020. And then we have the Greater Changhua project, which Ørsted owns alone, which we develop in strong collaboration with local suppliers. And these projects will be built between 21 and 25, and construction, well, onshore construction will already start next year. So it is a very fast movement, and I think a very strong success story right at the neighbor side, so to say. I think if you look at Taiwan, how they have done it, they have assigned round about 3.8 gigawatt under feed-in tariff, and you can see the height of the feed-in tariff here on the upper picture. That basically paved the way for an auction. So the first 3.8 gigawatt run under feed-in tariff, and then they right afterwards had the first auction for projects in 24, 25. And in that auction, they achieved a price of 2.5 Taiwan dollar, which is, you could say, roundabout at the levels of market prices at the moment. So it became very competitive very quickly, of course, only because we have a feed-in tariff for the first project and because we have a clear, visible process on how to develop offshore wind, and because there is a framework in place, and because we also anticipate that we have a mature supply chain in place by building the first projects and then take this experience into the next projects. We anticipate further cost out for sure. We have scalable operations, we have transmission synergies and a lot of learnings and data, as I mentioned. So what Ørsted has achieved there is we have received 920 megawatt under the feed-in tariff, and we have won another 900 megawatts through an auction. So it very much builds one on the other and gives us a good pipeline to bring costs down, to work with local partners, and to deliver offshore wind projects on time, on budget for Taiwan. And this is also what I think is something which could work very well for Japan. We are here to help, to learn about Japan, but also to bring knowledge and transfer knowledge. I hope we find interested partners and parties who want to further discuss with us. I will invite you for a discussion. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or some of my team members who are present. And I think and I hope we can all work together on our vision to create a world that runs entirely on green energy. Thank you very much.
At this moment, just for facts and simple aspects of the presentation, we would like to take short questions. So a very short time for short questions for the presentation that was just made. Just to clarify facts and the items discussed in the presentation.
The person with his or her hand up to the right, maybe in the middle row. I'd like to pose my question. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. If you could please state your name and affiliation. Junkanken Research Institute. My name is Emoto. In Taiwan, similar to Japan, they are hit with many strong typhoons, and the facilities that are durable and that can endure offshore wind, can they endure the typhoons? What type of facilities have you set that are durable to such typhoons?
I think the the conditions in Taiwan or in Japan are different in many ways from what we have seen in Europe, but many of it, or many things can also be at least compared to what we have experienced in Europe. We have, when it comes to typhoons, of course we need to strengthen the substructures and we need to have typhoon-proven turbine technology, but at the end of the day you build a very big building basically in the sea which should be able to withhold typhoons like a building on land. So we would have a lot of respect about that, but we have also a lot of comfort from an engineering side. One of the things which you could say it is not so much the strong winds, it is more the wave heights which impose a lot of challenges on the structures. The substructures need to be designed against that. But the wave heights which we have experienced, if you look at the typhoons of the past 20 years, I think we have wave heights of up to 19, 20 meters in Japan, and that is already something we have not in that frequency, but also in North Sea winter storms in the UK or in around Denmark, not so frequently, but it is something which we're not afraid of. We just need to add a bit to the capex because it requires a bit stronger design and a few other things. But we are very, I mean, that's where experience also kicks in, where I think we can provide a lot of comfort to whomever wants to build an offshore wind farm, because it's nothing what we're afraid of, but we have a lot of respect.
よろしいでしょうか。それではもう一方。
I hope that answered the question. I see a hand in the middle of the audience. I think we can take one more question. Please state your name and affiliation before asking questions.
I'm from International Christian University in Tokyo. I'd like to know if in Taiwan you're also competing with any Japanese companies, or at least maybe the Japanese companies are participating in joint ventures, and if you have any plans or provisional date when you'd like to enter the Japanese market.
I mean, in general, we observe a very heterogeneous competitor landscape in Taiwan, a lot of interest. We had, in the initial rounds, when it came to selecting sites, not so many Japanese players yet. They actually came in a bit later and have now taken different roles in investing into some of our competitors or peers' projects. So we see very high interest, but it is at this stage now, you could also say, now that the first two rounds have been formed, also a bit more difficult to find the right way in. But of course, the next big entry point is to invest into some of the wind farms. There's a lot of interest of our peers, but also ourselves, to bring in partners. We, of course, look first of all at local partners. So in Japan, we would maybe look at Japanese investors, and in Taiwan, we also try to find Taiwanese pension funds or insurance companies or any kind of investors. But of course, there's a strong relationship between Taiwan and Japan. I think you can leverage that in both sides. And I think Japanese investors are very welcome in Taiwan and vice versa. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there. In terms of taking a role in Japan, we believe this is a very attractive market. What we always look at is how strong the fundamental need for offshore wind is. We think Japan has a very strong need for offshore wind because of its geographics, the situation with nuclear and the energy mix in general requires a large-scale energy source which is ideally renewable. I think there's only one at the moment, that's offshore wind, also pretty stable for an industrial country in terms of how it produces. So we believe it will play an important role in the mix. And we as Ørsted think that we should play an important role in making such a technology or source successful. That's how we see our role as the market leader. So we're very interested to take a meaningful role together with a Japanese partner. But when we do that, that remains a bit open, because we wait still for the framework to materialize. But as I said at the beginning of my speech, we are here for many, many years observing the market, and it takes some time, but I think we're getting closer.
よろしいでしょうか。それでは
So with this, we'd like to finish the Q&A. Matthias-san, thank you so very much.
The next keynote speech is by Mr. Peter Jørgensen, Vice President of EnergyNet. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation to come here and share some Danish experience on how to develop and operate a transmission system with a high share of wind power. I want to be very honest here and say I'm not an expert in the Japanese electricity system. My speech is based on experience from Denmark, and I know that there are major differences between our systems and the circumstances, but I'm also convinced that there is a lot of benefits for your country in the experience gained in Denmark, and they could be transferred to a Japanese context also. My name is Peter Jørgensen. I've been with this industry for more than 13 years now, and I have the experience from the old world with the vertically integrated electricity companies, utilities, and now in the open electricity market with unbundling and competition. So I have the long-term experience, and I'm not a deep expert, but I know little about everything. The agenda for my presentation today is first a little introduction to EnergyNet, the transmission system operator I represent. Then how the development in Denmark was up till now, and how we operate the system, how it looks today with 43% wind power in the system. Then we'll go a little into detail on the main tools that we use for efficient integration of renewable energy in the system. Then I will take a long-term look at the Danish energy system, how we see it in 2050 when we will become independent on the fossil fuels, and how we plan to develop the system further to enable this green transition. EnergyNet is the state-owned, non-profit system operator of the Danish electricity and gas system. So we are a non-profit company owned by the Danish state, and we optimize our operation and also investments in the grid on socioeconomic welfare criteria for Denmark, not for the profit of the company. And I underline this because it's very important for your incentives for developing the transmission system for the benefit of the country. Our main responsibilities is to ensure the short and long-term security of supply. And short-term means that we operate the system in the daily operation. This is a picture from our control center where the system is operated. And long-term, because we also plan the transmission system of the future. So we have both, and then we have to operate it afterwards. So we have to make a good job. We also have a responsibility for the well-functioning of the electricity and gas markets. We observe the markets every day from our control center. We survey the functioning, the competition. And if we observe something that could be improved, then we draft some new proposals for regulation, market design, and propose these for our authorities, the energy agency and the energy regulator. And then it can be implemented in the market design and the rules. Then finally, we own, we operate, and we develop the transmission systems for both electricity and gas. So we're owner of the infrastructure, but only the transmission system. We have no ownership in any generation or any commercial activities. We are independent of all commercial activities in these markets. The agenda for our operation and our challenges as a system operator is set by the Danish government. The Danish government is very ambitious on the green transition. The first goal in 2020, which is actually the day after tomorrow when you talk about development of transmission systems, we will pass 50% wind power compared to the demand of electricity in Denmark. We will reach this. We are close to this now, so I'm sure we will reach this. Then the next step is by 2030, when renewable energy will constitute 55% of the total energy demand in Denmark, not just electricity, but the whole energy demand of Denmark will be covered by renewable energy. And then the long-term goal by 2050 is to make Denmark independent of fossil fuels. And this is in all sectors, not just electricity and gas and heating, but also transportation and industry. That's the long-term goal. And in Denmark, we are, as a transmission system operator, we are so lucky that these goals are supported by a vast majority in the Danish parliament. And this is a picture of the latest energy proposal, which was passed through as a law this year, this summer. And this new law was actually, or agreement on energy, was supported by all parties in the Danish parliament. That's the first time all parties voted for this. And this is confirming the goals that I have mentioned here. And in this transition, the strategic commitments and obligations of Energinet, the transmission system operator, is to keep up security of supply on the whole route from now till 2050. It is to make this transition efficient. And an example of being efficient is that the transmission system and our operational procedures have to be prepared in time for the coming wind and solar feed into the system. In Denmark, we do not curtail the wind power and the sun. We use all of it when it's there. And that is economic efficient. It's not efficient to upfront invest in PV and wind turbines and then curtail it when you have wind or sunshine. So that's one of the main issues for us and one of our obligations. Then thirdly, we have to create a healthy investment climate. We need to attract the right investments in generation and also in demand facilities in Denmark to make it attractive. And that's, as Matthias mentioned, a stable framework for investors so that they can go in and they are sure to get their money back. Oh, I'm sorry, this is the text in, in Japanese. It's not always coming the way I planned it here. Then a little about the Danish system, how it looks today. If we go 30 years back, we had few large coal-fired power plants in Denmark. That's the left drawing here. Big coal-fired power plants. Today, we have more than 6,000 wind turbines in the system. We have more than 450 local combined heat and power plants in the system, supplying district heating and electricity. And we still have most of these large coal-fired power plants in the system, but with lower capacity than originally. This is the technical development. Then parallel with this, we have undergone the market opening and the unbundling. And that was around the year 2000 when the market was opened in Denmark and we unbundled the former vertically integrated utility. I was employed in this utility planning new coal-fired power plants. And then we built the necessary grid and that was it. Today we are 100% unbundled. So the transmission system operator here in yellow, that's Energinet. We are state-owned, non-profit, and 100% independent of any commercial interest. So we can build and operate the grid at the benefit of the country, not for the generators or the consumers, but for the whole country, for all parties. And then generation and trade is commercial entities. They have to make a profit or they will go bankrupt. And that's the way business works. And then in distribution, we have a regulated part on grid and then a sales part on supply. And I emphasize this unbundling because to our experience in Europe, this is very, very important for creating the right grid and also creating and facilitating competition in an electricity market. This is the development of wind power and solar power in Denmark. And again, we go 30 years back. That's when it started. And it started with onshore wind power 30 years ago. Then 50 years ago, or 15 years ago here, we started with the offshore wind power. And then 5 years ago, the PV started in Denmark. And I want to emphasize that it took 30 years to get us where we are today, because this is not just a technical process, it's also a mental process, as mentioned by our ambassador, to acknowledge that there are other ways than the traditional and old-fashioned way of operating an electricity system. Now we can operate with 43% wind power in the system. And when we started here, I was in the business, I remember it. We said, well, okay, we can maybe handle 3 to 5% of wind power. Otherwise, it will become unstable. Today, we operate at almost 50%. So it is possible, but you have to invest in the grid and develop the necessary tools to do this. It's a change of paradigm. This is the energy balance last year. And that was the first year when the wind power here with 43% exceeded the total generation on thermal plants. And these thermal plants are also, a large share of these are also renewable because it's on biomass. But the total sum of thermal plants was exceeded by wind power in the system. We had a little share of solar power, and then an import to the country of 14% of the electricity demand. Because we are connected to our neighbors. We are a very small country. We have strong interconnection to our neighbors. And this is just the net import. So this is just the difference between the import and the export. So we have intensely trade with neighboring countries, which is very important for our efficient integration of renewable energy. So again, the grid is so important. The installed capacities in Denmark today, compared to the demand, this is the peak demand and the low load demand. And then you can see we have, this one is the installed capacity in the large power plants, the formerly coal-fired power plants that used to cover the peak plus 20%. They are decommissioned, and this will decrease further in the future. Then we have the local power plants, the small power plants. Then we have a very high share of wind turbines. They could almost cover the peak demand in Denmark. We have a little share of PV. There's not much sunshine in Denmark. And then we have a large capacity on interconnectors to our neighboring countries. And if you look at the map of Denmark here, you can see we have, this is Denmark. Then we have Norway, which is hydro-based. So we have strong interconnectors to the hydro-based system in Norway. We have to the Swedish system, which is biomass, some wind turbines, some nuclear power. We have strong connection to Germany, which is the continental system. We are building a new connection to Germany here and connection of offshore wind farms. So it's a combined grid solution, grid connection and interconnector. And then we are building a subsea cable to the Netherlands, and we are planning for a link to the United Kingdom. And all these investments are based on socio-economic benefits for the country. and they all have positive business cases. So the country makes more money by investing in these connections to the benefit of the consumers, the generators, and also the system operator who will own these interconnectors. Now I will show you an example of 1 week how the system balance is obtained. And this is a week actually 2 years ago in a September week where the share of wind power was little more than 50%. I could have taken a week with a higher share of wind power, but I like this week. This is the demand in Denmark. You can see the gray area here is the demand in Denmark from Monday to Sunday with a lower demand in the weekend. And then on the same graph, we have the wind power production hour by hour. This is measured value hour by hour. And the little yellow here is the solar power into the system. So you have some hours with almost no wind and sun, and you have hours where the wind alone will cover the demand, and we have hours here where the wind alone produce more than the demand in Denmark. And then how would this look in the dispatch? This is the result of the dispatch in this week, and no wind or PV was curtailed. Everything was fed in and used in the system. Below zero here you have export. That's export out of Denmark, net export. And then the gray area here is import to Denmark. And then we have the big power plants, the dark blue, and the small power plants, and then the wind and the solar. And the first impression you get when you look at this is that it's very, very dynamic and very flexible. And that's the main message. To integrate variable renewable energy requires a flexible energy system. This is based on the market, the electricity market, and this dispatch is created by the market. It's not a dictation from our control center. This is a result of prices and bids and offers in the spot market. And if you take a look here where we have a lot of wind, you see that the dark color here is almost disappearing. And this was the first time ever in Denmark when we ran the western part of Denmark without any big power plants on the grid. They were all stopped. They would run on a little generation on the local power plants, but then on wind power. Today we operate the system in many, many hours without big power plants on the grid. This is driven by the electricity market. This is the spot price in Denmark in Danish kroner per megawatt hour. And you see there's a big variation in prices. And that reflects the balance of the system. So if we have a very low generation on wind power, we have high prices to attract import to the country and incentivize the power plants to maximize their generation. When we have a lot of wind in the system, we have a low price and makes the generators stop their power plants. Otherwise, they would lose money. Why produce and use money for fuel if you don't get these costs covered by the market price? And then here in the weekend, you can see we have a zero price. This is the average price of Denmark, East and West. Actually, we had negative prices in the western part of Denmark. We operate with negative prices. And that's to ensure that you stop your generation when the market doesn't want more electricity, you should stop. So we actually operate with negative prices in the system. And these variations are from hour to hour. I'll just show you the situation here where there was no big power plants on the system. The prices here, you can see the western part of Denmark is one price area. We had a price of 65 Danish kroner per megawatt hour, which is a very low price. We had a lot of wind in the system. There was a little higher price in the eastern part of Denmark and in Sweden. We had the same price in Norway. So all these price areas with the same price, they have available capacity on the interconnectors. And then you can have the same price if you have available capacity. If you have a price difference here from 65 to 76. Then the link is fully loaded with export from low price to high price. That's the way the market coupling, the market does it. The allocation of capacity is an implicit part of the market and the price building. So we always ensure maximal flow from low price to high price. Then if you study this carefully, you'll see, okay, what happened here? You have 200 kroner in Germany, only 65 in Denmark, and we have import. This was not part of the electricity market. This was because the TSO in Germany, they asked Denmark to help them because they had too much wind in the system, and then we actually imported from Germany during system operation. So it was a redispatch where we helped the Germans to balance their system because we had the ability to turn down, or the market turned down the power plants in the system. On our website, you can find these situations from hour to hour. It's all publicly available on the website. This is an example from the summer 2015. Here you have the central power plants, that's the dark blue, and you see they are running at a minimum capacity all hours. This is the spot price, so even if the price is very low, they operate, and that's because 3 years ago we paid the big generators to stay on the grid to stabilize the grid. Then 2 years later, last year, you see that the big generators, they only start up generation when the price is high and they can make money, otherwise they shut down. And now we don't pay them to be on the grid anymore because we can run the grid without the big power plants. And this is due to 7 synchronous condensers we have installed in the Danish grid. A synchronous condenser is a generator, but without the power plant. It's a generator just run by an electric motor. You spin it up and synchronize it to the grid and let it stay there. And this stabilizes the grid. It can deliver inertia and very fast reactive power and shortcut current in the system. So now we can run without the big power plants because the transmission system is built more robust so we can handle operation on wind power and solar alone. This is the security of supply in Denmark and compared to a number of European countries. And this is the minutes of outage per consumer over 10 years. And you can see that Denmark, we are at the very, very top of levels for security of supply. And this is just to show that a high level of renewable energy in the system does not prevent you from keeping a very high level of security of supply in your system if you just are prepared and does it in the right way. Then I will dig a little into the toolbox we see as very important for this efficient integration of renewable energy. And this is an overview of the 4 most important issues for our development of the system. The first one is a strong transmission grid and interconnectors, so that you can balance the renewable energy in a larger area than in just a small area. So a strong transmission grid. The next one is the international electricity markets, so that you can use the full capacity in your grid from having a merit order dispatch and always trading from low price to high price. So you can say the market is the software and the transmission system is the hardware to ensure this. Then we have a very flexible generation system. I'll show you even coal-fired power plants are running very flexible today. And then last but not least, we have developed a number of specialized forecasting and planning tools for our control center. You operate the system in a very different way today than we did 30 years ago with only thermal power plants. First on the transmission system. This is a picture, a map of Europe. And most of the new investments in transmission grid are triggered by renewable energy, biomass, wind, and solar in the system. And in Europe, we do the planning together with all the other transmission system operators in Europe. We are 42 transmission system operators working closely together, making 10-year network development plans. And these huge investments enable a merit order dispatch. Always use the cheapest generation first. It enables us to balance in a larger, diversified area, and we can share reserves between the countries, which means that the business case for this investment is positive. You get a good business out of investing in the grid. Otherwise, you couldn't use the huge investment in the generation system. The value of the generation system would be reduced more than the investment in the grid, to build the grid. Then the trigger, the software for this is the electricity markets. And I've not time to go into detail, but we have the financial markets for long-term price hedging. That's purely financial. Then we have the day-ahead market. That's the spot market where most of the energy is traded. Then there's an intraday market where you can trade up till 1 hour before system operation. And that's all by the commercial parties in the market. We don't interfere at all. Then we take over the system and make the physical, ensure the physical balancing of the system, but also market-based. We have a balancing market there where we buy up and down regulation from the generators and demand, and then we ensure the balance of the system. But if you look at the turnover in this market, you see that 500 in the Nordic, 500 terawatt hour is traded in the day-ahead market, only 4 in the intraday, and only 2 in the balancing, which shows you that the commercial market here actually gets very close to the final balance of the system, because we have these price incentives to get into balance. So the market actually solves a large share of this problem for us to balance the system with clear price signals. We have a market that is coupled in all of the European countries now. Almost all countries are now part of this market coupling. So within this area, from the north of Norway to the south of Sicily and Spain, we have market coupling ensuring that electricity flows from low price to high price at the maximum capacity of the grid, enabling this efficient balancing of the system. Flexibility. This is a picture of a 25-year-old coal-fired power plant in Denmark, built as a baseload, very efficient coal-fired power plant. Today, this power plant operates down to 10% of rated outputs, up and down. And it has a regulating rate of 3 to 4% per minute. It was not built this way, but with modifications, it is made flexible. The owner of this, which by the way is Ørsted, have made it flexible to be able to operate in the Danish system and sell regulating and ancillary service to the system. They are also equipped with heat accumulators and electric boilers so that you can make it even more flexible on the electricity side. This is just an example of how the dark here is the price per hour, and the green is how a coal-fired power plant is ramping up and down as used for balancing the system. So we don't need base load, we need flexibility in the system. And this is enabled with big coal-fired power plants today. Then being prepared for balancing the system is very important for the efficiency and also for the security of the system. So we make forecasts. That's very important for our system operation. This is an example of forecast for wind power. And this is the mean absolute error in % of the installed capacity in wind power in Denmark. And you see when we start 40 hours ahead, we can make the forecast of about 5% accuracy. And then when we get closer to the operation, this is reduced and we can get down to around 3%. This is based on meteorological data that we receive. But within the daily operation, we use our own online measurements to supplement the meteorological data. So instead of following the blue line down to 3%. By using online measurements, we can actually follow the red one. And then 1 hour before operation, when we take over the balancing, it's down to 1.5%. And with 5 gigawatts installed, that's 75 megawatts. So that's the mean absolute error. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes lower. But these 75% you can compare to the largest unit in the system, which is 600 megawatt, an interconnector or coal-fired power plant. And we always have reserves enough for the N-1 criteria to be able to run the system with a failure on the largest unit. So that's more enough also for covering the wind turbine, the wind uncertainty in the system. So we don't buy extra reserves for wind. Then a little about the future. If we look at now some of this text should come later on, but I'll just put all of the text in here now. We are almost at 50% now. And these are the traditional tools we have used until now, the ones I just mentioned here. And we call this the horizontal integration, because this is the European-wide market, and it's the transmission system around Europe in a larger area. We can't continue this for the next 50% renewable energy in the system. Our neighbors will also have a lot of wind in the system, and we need some new tools. And here we see that now we go for the vertical integration in the system. First of all, this is coupling of the different energy sectors so that electricity can substitute fossil fuels also in the heating and the industry and the gas and in the transportation sector. That's the sector coupling, coherent energy systems. The other one is to also activate the demand side. So from the wholesale market down to the retail market, that's the other vertical integration in the system. And here we see that the new market players and digital platforms and digital business models come into place here and will enable this further flexibility in the system. So here, from the horizontal integration on the first 50% to the vertical integration for the next. And I think this is very relevant for in a Japanese context also. You can make the horizontal to have a strong grid in all of Japan. You have a country, I think the ambassador says, 7 times larger than little Denmark. So first of all, the horizontal, and then the vertical integration into sectors. This is just an example of coherent energy systems. We have calculated how this would look. And this is for 2035. At this point, the heating and electricity sector will be fossil independent. And the only fossil fuels here are used for transportation, road, railway, sea transport, aviation. But the heating and electricity sector is fossil free. And you see the processes across the different energy sectors with using excess electricity for making synthetic fuels, hydrogen, and these different processes, so that we can use the gas system for storing energy when we have excess electricity in the system. So this is the coherent energy system. We have modeled this and calculated this, and it is possible. The costs are still high, but we hope for development of these processes before we get to this point. The other one is the digitalization of the industry. From the traditional sequential business model here, from producer to grid to distribution and customer, we see a breakup, a disruption of these value chains in the future, where you have a lot of different models here with your electric, and many of them are behind the meter in the households. You are charging your electric car, you have heat pumps, you have solar heat, you have a battery, and this is controlled in the sky with some digital platform, somebody aggregating your flexibility and selling this flexibility to the system operator. So a lot of different business models will come into play in the future. And this will support our transition. Then the second last slide is just demonstrating it's not all small solutions behind the meter. We also still go for the big power plants, but it's not the traditional power plant, it's big offshore plants in the North Sea. And there's a huge potential for offshore wind in the North Sea. And to make this more efficient in the future, when we have to harvest many, many gigawatts, we are now planning for an artificial island, to build an island out in a shallow watered area in the North Sea called the Dogger Bank, where we can have all the HVDC equipment so that far offshore becomes near shore. And then you can actually connect all the wind farms here around the island with AC, which is much more cheap, much cheaper than HVDC, to the island. And then from the island, you can transport with interconnectors, traditional DC interconnectors to the different countries. We are in this project with other European TSOs, and maybe this could be realized by 2030, 2035, but that's one of the solutions for real big-scale offshore wind energy in the future. Summing up my presentation, very ambitious goals in Denmark. I don't want to repeat them. The toolbox until now: strong transmission grids and interconnectors, efficient electricity markets to ensure the full utilization of the infrastructure and the generation system, flexible and controllable generation system, flexible power plants, even coal-fired power plants are flexible today, specialized forecasting operational planning tools to be prepared instead of being surprised when something changes, continuously updating all the forecasts so that we are prepared for what is happening. And then the long-term enablers is a coherent energy system with all the sectors coupled, sector coupling, transformation of the value chain, going more digital, demand-side flexibility, and then just to mention that we still have both large-scale and small-scale solutions in the system. Thank you very much for your attention.
Peter 様、ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. At this moment, just like we did earlier, with respect to facts or technicalities discussed in the presentation, we would like to ask the audience for questions or clarifications. I see a hand in the left. Please state your name and affiliation before asking a question.
Thank you, Peter. My name is Sato Mizuguchi, freelance journalist. You and Ambassador told us that energy transition is also a mental process. Can you explain more about what the mental process means to you? Thanks.
Yeah. Well, I was a young engineer in the electricity industry in Denmark 30 years ago, when the government, they got this idea of building wind power in the system. And we actually thought that this was a bit crazy because we had the world's most efficient coal-fired power plants. And our management was against, and this was against our business model and so on. But gradually, if you task engineers to solve a challenging problem and you give them a budget, they will solve it. And then gradually you find it very interesting to have these challenges. And once you develop the new tools and see that they work, you become, your attitude is becoming much more positive towards the renewable technologies. And that's what I mean with the mental process. And it's not overnight. We've been on this for 30 years, and maybe it took the first 5 years to convince first the engineers and then the management that this was the way to go. And we heard that Ørsted, for actually many years ago, I think it's more than 10 years ago, made the new strategy from coal to wind power. And then it's also a mental process for your employees in the company to support these new goals and leave the old ideas behind you. That's what I mean with the mental process. So it takes some time.
よろしいでしょうか。
Did that answer the question?
You can entertain one more question. The person in the middle, the person in the second or third row, please. Chiba Commercial University. My name is Harashita. Chiba University of Commerce, that's where I'm from. And in relation to what was just mentioned, I was very impressed by the fact that, first of all, non-profit, you're a non-profit organization. And healthy investment climate you mentioned in your presentation. And I think this relates very much to the mental topic. I specialize in social technology. I was conducting research at the Tokyo Institute of Technology, and the citizens' voice, how much the citizens' voice is reflected in the policy. Denmark is very advanced as a democratic country. So I think that's one reason why Denmark has been able to become this advanced. So what do you think about this point?
I think we have had some very ambitious Danish politicians and ministers. There was especially one minister many years ago. He was very ambitious on the green transition. And they were pushing this development from the government and pushing the industry. And so it takes political will and also courage to do this, because you can't do this from the utility side. A utility will defend the business you have. It takes a government decision to go on the green transition and to push for this development of the grid and make an independent system operator. We are state-owned, independent. So the state had to take over the transmission grid and then establish this new entity to develop this on a neutral basis, independent of commercial activities, and based on socio-economic welfare for Denmark. So it's from the politician, from government side. Otherwise, I don't see how to do it and give the right incentives to build the grid.
I do understand that politicians were very active, but in the background, it was supported by the general public. So I thought that there must be a system to reflect the public's voice and encourage the politicians to act upon that.
Yeah, there is, in general, there's a large support from the Danish population for the green transition. But nobody wants a wind turbine in their backyard, and especially not if your neighbor is making the money. But the general support for the green transition, yeah. So offshore wind is very good because you don't see them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Peter-sama.
Thank you very much. We would now like to take a 20-minute break.